I'm not a theoretician. I'm not going to give you any background of historical development in any field. I'm just going to talk about my experience. This is my background again. I went to Heidelberg University, 4-year university course, and have been a freelancer ever since. Right from the get-go, I was always of the strong opinion that being prepared is your best bet when you go into any interpreting situation. Of course, as you probably all know, two different kinds of interpreting, simultaneous and consecutive. Preparation is equally important for both. There's many kinds of different interpreting situations. How many of you are interpreters? That's a fair amount. How many do simultaneous interpretation mostly? How many do more consecutive interpretation? That's a fair share. I do both. And it's important, I think, to look at the main differences. Maybe you are a translator thinking about also interpreting. What is the difference, apart from the obvious that you're not writing but you're talking? I think among the main differences is that when you translate a text, you are given the whole text. That's it. You can look at it, you can agree to translate it, you can say it's not my cup of tea. When you are hired for an interpreting assignment, you don't really know what you're saying yes to. They will give you the topic, they will tell you usually, oh, it's going to be easy. Piece of cake. But what is actually going to be thrown at you, you don't have an idea at the point when you say, I will do this. When you translate, any kind of preparation that you do is very text specific. If you accept a translation on a website for any company that produces something, that is your terminology. You can focus on that. If you accept an interpreting job, chances are they're going to focus on a specific subject too, which does not mean that nothing else can come up, because when people talk, they tend to digress. They tend to use analogies from other areas, sports analogies, the whole thing. So you can never be sure that I only need this and nothing else. When you do translation, you have all the time in the world till the deadline. If you find one term particularly bothersome, you can spend 2 hours researching that term. If it's a key term, it pays to do that. Or even longer. When you are interpreting, if it's in your preparation material, yes, you can spend time researching it. If it isn't, you might have anything from a couple of minutes. If you're doing a consecutive, while you're taking notes, you can think about, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? To like next to no time when you're doing simultaneous. So when you're translating, you're probably in your comfort zone. You can do it in your sweats, in your office. Nobody's looking over your shoulder. But when you're interpreting, the moment you walk in, you are not the master of anything anymore. You don't determine how long the speaker speaks. You don't determine how fast he speaks. You don't determine what he says. And they are most likely going to be throwing stuff at you that's not even feasible. But you still have to deal with it one way or another. So most likely you're out of your comfort zone most of the time. In translation, most people specialize. I do IT translations when I do translations. I would never ever accept a translation in a highly specialized technical scientific field like chemical translations. Never, ever. I don't know much about it. But as an interpreter, you're sort of a generalist. I prepare for every assignment, but I still can't afford to say I only do political interpretation. I'd be starting. So, talking about preparation. Lead time, like I already said, sometimes you get a conference or an assignment a year before. Oh, that's perfect. Then you can spend the whole year looking out for that topic, gathering information, just dandy. But the time is decreasing. The longest I've had this year was 3 months. That's already much better than the usual, which is next week, the day before, which decreases your preparation time tremendously. The amount of preparation material that you typically see is anything from nothing but the agenda, which is not a whole lot, to a stack of material or so many references that you don't even know where to begin. I recently had a meeting, legal context. The German visitors sent us 4 presentations, the actual presentations they were giving. The Canadian counterparts sent us links to court decisions, each of them 50 pages long. We'll be referring to those.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Then you have to wait. Is it worth my time going through 6 50-page decisions they might only touch on? Or do I focus my attention on the 4 presentations that I have that will most likely, not for sure, but most likely be read? You have to be wise with your time. You might ask, why is preparation so important? Well, it's the only part of the whole thing you can really influence. Preparation gives you confidence. You can't know everything there is to know in all the fields that you might be required to interpret in. But you can do your best to become knowledgeable in the time that they give you. So I think it will help you do a better job. I know you still have to work with what's in there as opposed to what's in your dictionary or in your computer from previous translations. And you have to be able to access it in the time that you have. But the more you put in there just beforehand, the higher the chance that you'll perform well. And, you know, especially when it's a customer that you're working for the first time, it doesn't hurt to impress the customer with the fact that you know what's going on in the field right now. So you might ask, well, when do I start preparing for interpreting assignments? I would say the moment you decide to be an interpreter. Because you need to be very current on things that are going on. So my best advice I can give tonight is read, 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 read. And not only read in your favorite subject, read everything, because you don't know what's going to come up. When I think back on my university time, I went into university not reading any newspapers. I just wasn't into that. Our teachers immediately told us, got to start reading the paper. Read one in every language that you work in. And it took me a while to get into that because there was so many subjects I didn't know anything about, and it was so tedious to go through the articles, and it's like, I don't even understand it, and why should I be reading this? I'm not going to be working with that. But you start to realize that, yes, you will, because people refer to things that are current, that are topical, when they talk, when they meet, when they talk to other people. It's not as clear-cut as in translation. So the best thing is to read all the time, to read as widely as you can. I subscribe to 2 magazines or newspapers, Spiegel, Newsweek, and I read them front to cover every week. And then of course I read online as well. But those 2 I have been reading for close to 30 years now, every week, front to cover. Same thing here again. So read as much as you can, especially the subjects you don't know a lot about. The more you read, the easier it will become, because you remember, oh, I've read that before. You start to be able to put it into context. What I also do when I read is I keep a handy list. And when I see things that, oh, I think that's interesting, that's what they call it, I write it down. Because if I just read it, I'm sure I will forget it. So I keep lists. When I read in German about the American election campaign and the election system, I write down the things. If there was a particular subject that came up, you know, like in 2000, the elections were all about the hanging chads afterwards, you know. If you see a German article talking about it and you, oh, that's what they call it, I write it down. And if you keep doing that, you know, you build up your vocabulary, and you have something to go back to when you need to translate it or know it. But you also need to keep in contact with the spoken language. For anybody who lives outside of their native country, like I have been living in North America for 20 years, you've got to make sure that your native tongue is still current. And just reading it is not enough. You've got to be able to speak it, so just try to keep in contact with fellow native German speakers. Now with the internet it's so much easier. You can just watch the news online and it's gotten a lot easier. So basically, whereas translators always try to be specialists in one area, interpreters are better off being a bit of a jack of all trades. So that was general preparation. What about specific preparation? Let's say you receive a call, somebody wants to hire you for an assignment. I think you should be asking a lot of questions, because the more questions you ask, the more you know about the assignment and the more targeted your preparation can be. So ask, who will be talking to whom? What is the setting? Simultaneous, consecutive. How long will they meet? What are the languages? What is the equipment going to be? Make sure that you really know what you're getting into, because some agencies have interesting opinions about what is feasible and what is not. I actually had one agency offering me an assignment where they wanted me to use the hotel intercom to provide simultaneous interpretation. I don't think so. I don't think that's a good idea. But you have to ask questions, otherwise you don't find out what bizarre ideas they might have. Ask about colleagues. It's very important too that you know who you're going to be working with. Because sometimes you end up with somebody in the booth who's never been there before. Once the meeting starts, there's not much you can do about it, and you might be stuck shouldering more than your share of work. So ask about it beforehand, and be aware that sometimes they pair you up with inexperienced people. What is the objective of the meeting is very interesting too, because that definitely influences how you translate for your customer. Ask beforehand about preparation material. Point it out as many times as you can. That is probably the most important aspect, because almost anybody underestimates the value of preparation material. Like what Lola said, the situation with the interpreters not knowing about the meeting. Most organizers are reluctant to give it out. They tell you, yes, we'll provide it, but then somewhere down the line, they have to tell people abroad. They are late in putting their presentation together. They don't send it, they forget. And a lot of agencies don't want to bug their customers. So they might tell you they're going to provide it, but more often than not, they end up not providing it. So don't count on it. It's nice if you get it, but don't rely on it, because it might not happen. Definitely ask for a preliminary agenda so you can get going. Even if nothing else comes, make sure you know early on what they're going to be talking about. Try your best to eliminate surprises. Surprises are terrible for an interpreter. You do not want to be surprised, because that means you're going to look bad. In general, people say you should prepare one day for every day you're interpreting, at least, but it depends. If you're new, you might have to put in more than the one day. If it's a new topic, you might have to put in more days. If you've done the same customer 3-4 times before, maybe you just pull out your glossary, do what you did last time, and that might be enough. It depends on the situation. But be conscious that it's really your duty to your client to do all that you need to do to be prepared. And only you know what it takes to be prepared for that meeting. So let's say you get the agenda. I would go through the agenda and Google all the keywords. I would Google all the participants and the organizations involved. So if I have a delegation coming over from Germany, I usually do not get any more information than the agenda. So I will look at who are we going to see, and I will Google those people. And normally that gives me enough material to read to be prepared. Because if somebody receives a foreign delegation, what are they going to talk about? Whatever their field is, what is the most topical in their field. And they usually publish about that. They will put that on their website. So if you read what's publicly available, you'll have some level of preparation already. I usually create a file or a folder on my computer, and as I'm reading, I'm copying things and putting them in there, because sometimes I have to fly somewhere for the meeting and I can still read some articles while I'm going there. If I just think, oh, I'll look at that later, I might lose where it is, I might forget, so I like to just copy it, or at least bookmark the website so that I know how to find it. Also, while you're at the meeting, it might turn out that, boy, that website was so good, you might want to use it during the meeting. So it's good to keep track of what you found that was helpful. Also, while you're looking at all these organizations, you might come across a couple of handy glossaries that are worthwhile saving for future reference. So basically, if you don't have any documents, start with the speaker. Be very knowledgeable about what he's most likely going to be telling his listener. Know who your listeners are, what they want to get out of it. Know about the subject matter. I personally like Wikipedia a lot because it's a very handy tool. For German, it's very broad. So any subject that I get, I look at the English website and then I look at the German Wikipedia site. And where it's not a real translation, it talks about the same things, right? So you can get some ideas of terms, and then you can Google those terms again, and you can get really lost in it too. But it pays to be curious and to keep reading, and the more you know, the more competent you will feel talking to people for who this subject matter is. You know, they deal with it every day. If you read a lot about it, you will feel comfortable being among them and helping them understand. Immerse yourself in the subject. It also helps you familiarize yourself with the jargon. Every group has their own jargon, and if you hear it for the first time, it might throw you off. So if you read about it beforehand, you can think about it and prepare how you would translate it. Let's say you do get documents. Some colleagues might decide to put the documents away till shortly before the meeting. It's a good idea to always look at what they're sending you, because then you can assess how much time you actually need to prepare it. It has happened to me that I was busy with other things and I just thought, oh, once I'm done with this job, I'll look at that job, and then I realized, oh my God, they send me all these files and I only left myself 2 days, it's not enough. So keep looking at what they're sending you and be aware of how large it is so that you can leave enough time. Sometimes you will actually get the scripts to the speeches that are going to be delivered, or at least they say they will deliver it. Be very careful. Sometimes they do have the speech for 40 minutes and they walk up and they are told, oh, sorry, you only have 10 minutes, and then oops, goes that speech. Or they decide themselves, oh, what the previous speaker said was so interesting, I'd rather refer to what he said, and they alter it. So I usually resist the temptation to translate the speech, because then you get very upset when they don't read it. And it's actually harder to sight interpret from a script that you have translated when they're jumping around. And it's really not necessary. Read the text, understand the text, research the material, find the translations for the key terms only, write those translations over the key terms, and then segment and highlight the text. So if you're going from Germany to English, you know, you have the verb at the end, so you might want to circle the verbs so that when you start your sentence, sight translating, you know what the verb's going to be. That could be helpful. Or if you have numbers or proper names, you might highlight them in one color so that it's easier for you to find, especially when they start jumping around. And also, when they do jump around, you should be in a team, right? You should have a booth colleague. So hopefully, if you're a good team, your colleague will help you find your spot if the speaker starts jumping around. Definitely read all the material that they sent you. It really pays off. When you're doing a consecutive, what I would do is make a list of the key terms and have the agenda and the list of participants on me. You can't have dictionaries with you, you can't have your computer. But you can have like little note cards with the most important terms, because you might forget, because you might be nervous or it might be a difficult term. So I have those in my pad, and if I need to, I can pull it out and refresh my memory. Make sure you have enough notepads if you're doing consecutives, and ample amount of pens, because they always tend to run out of you right when you start. In your mind, go over your note-taking technique, whatever you have learned. Maybe think of some abbreviations or symbols that are specific to the assignment you're going to do. There's no need to, in longhand, write the name of the company every time. Think of something that makes sense to you to abbreviate it and save yourself the time of writing it out. Bring water. You never know if they're going to provide it for you. If you're doing consecutive and you're in close contact with your customers, mints might be a good idea. I always carry snacks. Energy bars are great, because you never know when you're going to be able to eat. And if you're low on energy, your concentration slips. So energy bars are great. Make sure you know how to get to the meeting, how long it will take, so you can be there at least 30 minutes before. It's never a good idea to cut it too close and you arrive after everybody else. Not a good idea. Dress professionally and make sure that you are in a place in the room where you can really hear. Sometimes they try to put the interpreter in a corner somewhere so they can forget that there is an interpreter. No, you need to be where you can hear, because you're providing the most important service. You're making communication possible. So you are the person to determine where you need to sit, and that is where you can hear. For simultaneous, the preparation is similar. Most colleagues have their laptop in the booth with them these days. More often than not, you will be given the internet access, which is very, very helpful. Then you can use all the websites you have bookmarked in your preparation, and you can actually go to them while you're working. You might think about bringing specialized dictionaries if you have something in that area. For example, if you have a meeting that you think will probably be quoting the Bible extensively, it might be a good idea to bring an English and a German Bible with you, or a German and English copy of the basic law, whatever it is that you're talking about. I always create a glossary for every assignment, and I have it on my computer, but just in case something happens, I usually carry a printout of that glossary as well, just in case. And then the same is for consecutive. Be there early enough, dress professionally, and be prepared in general. Preparation continues during the meeting, I think, because you learn as you're going along. You hear what the delegates say in the other language, and if you had thought about translating something that way, and all of a sudden you go, oh, they're calling it that way, then you've got to take note of that, and you've got to start using their terminology. You've got to be able to revise what you had in your mind to use and write it down for next time. Also, be aware that you might have the same assignment again in a year, so make sure you keep track of the terms that were used. Don't forget you're a team in the booth. When your colleague is working, I know there's a lot of colleagues that like to leave the booth and not come back till a half hour later when it's time to work. But it is actually much better to stay in the booth, because your colleague might get into trouble, might really, really need you, or they might be talking about something in that half hour that you're not working that you'll be needing for the next half hour. They might actually be referring to that. So while, of course, anybody has to go to the bathroom or has to maybe stretch their legs, I think it's advisable to stay in the meeting room as much as you can, just not to miss anything. And also help out your colleague. If there's a whole bunch of numbers that are thrown at you, be nice, write them down so that your colleague can focus on the terminology and not have to be bogged down by numbers. And if you notice your colleague is struggling with a term, which is really easy to tell for a sensible boothmate, look it up for them. And actually the website that you listed, Lingwe, is my favorite website. I use it all the time in the booth. It's fantastic for German. It actually, I think, lists, or it pulls from all the bilingual websites that are on the web. I don't think they have to even feed specific things. It just pulls from the internet. So anything that has ever been translated comes up if you enter a term. You have to be very careful because a lot of the translations are done machine translations, and there's some weird stuff that comes up, but you know enough about the language to know which translations to use and not. But it is a very good tool, and you can use it while you're doing simultaneous. I do it all the time, and it's really helpful. And you can also use your computer to pull up things that become important while you're talking about it. That legal assignment that I had the other day, they were talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and they were starting to quote it, and I know I had seen it in German. You can pull it up, and you can read the translation instead of making your own. It's much better that way. Last minute documents. Anybody who's worked in the booth has probably experienced that. All of a sudden, the speaker comes by the booth and says, "Oh, by the way, would you like this speech that I'm giving in a minute?" "Oh, sure." And then he gives you 20 pages. And what are you going to do? Most important thing, don't panic. You can't read it all, and you can't pretend that you had it for 3 weeks and prepared it. But what you can do is quickly and methodically start sort of cross-reading. Special emphasis on the beginning and at the end, so that you know where the speaker is headed. That can be very helpful. While you're reading, highlight the key terms again. Only look up the words that are really essential. Don't get bogged down in the little things, the little bird here and there. Just go for the key words, because you won't have much time and the speaker will start, and you have to be ready. And then do not get distracted by the document in front of you. It's very hard when you have something in front of you that you think is going to be read, and you listen and the speaker is doing something else. If that happens and you can't find it, just put it away and focus on listening, because that is what you're there for, to interpret the spoken word, not what somebody put in front of you. Just some examples. Recently I did a consecutive for the President of the National Council of the Federal Assembly of Switzerland, which was a half-day meeting. I didn't get anything. I just got the agenda. And I must admit that I know very little about Switzerland. I'm from Germany. I know they speak German, but I don't know anything about the political system. So it was a little bit scary. I made sure first that he really wanted German and that he was going to speak High German and not Swiss German, which I would probably not understand. Then I Googled the person, since he was a high-ranking politician. He had his own website, so I read through all of that. So I knew what his hobbies were. I knew that he was a farmer. I knew what his farm produced, because chances are he's going to be talking about that, right? I read about his background, his party affiliation. You got to know what party he's from, his profession, and then I read the Wikipedia articles on the Swiss parliamentary system, how it's organized, what it's called, and I could have spent 3 days reading about that because it was all news to me. But, and then I created a glossary, and then I pulled out, because we were visiting the Legislative Assembly here in Toronto, I pulled out that glossary, which I created for previous visits. And that was good, because once again, I forgot what that ceremonial mace is called in German. So it's good to refresh your memory if you've looked it up before. Make sure you take it along. And then I also reviewed the terminology and the procedures of the Legislative Assembly again. And yeah, there's a lot you can do, even if they don't give you any information. And then that was the legal assignment that I had recently. It was actually the German Federal Constitutional Court visiting the Supreme Court of Canada. The German judges sent 4 very difficult presentations. Was the relationship between international and constitutional law, the principle of proportionality, the duty of sincere cooperation, and constitutional review of social benefits legislation. It was difficult. It was really tough, and no Canadian papers whatsoever. So I again started off by Googling the 2 courts, just getting the basic facts, what the different judges were called, how many people were on the court, what their most recent decisions were. And then I started working on the 4 presentations, and again looked up the basic terms without translating the whole text. it became clear that the Germans were going to heavily quote the basic law, so it was clear I had to bring versions in English and in German, so that you don't improvise on something as important as your constitution. You want to use the official translation. And again, the Canadian judges had just given a list of 8 judgments that they wanted to refer to. And I must admit, I did not read through the 50 pages of judgments each. I just read the beginning, which is a summary of what the case is about and what the main legal points were. And I decided that was enough. I couldn't do any more. And I looked up the terms that came up there, and that proved to be good. And then I continued preparing through both days while working, because it was an extremely difficult assignment, probably one of the most difficult I've ever done. And you do feel that you're not doing an adequate job when it gets to that technical difficulty, but you're doing the best you can. We're not lawyers. We only had those 4 presentations. They can't expect you to write a doctoral thesis on it. Those are some of the resources that I use. Of course, Wikipedia, Lingui. I really suggest you all check it out if you haven't used it. I don't know how it is in the other languages. It's pretty good for German, but it also is available in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Dict is also an online dictionary that I use as a second resource, which also is available in a great number of languages. Then if you do computer-related stuff, Microsoft, of course, has online glossaries, and then there's people that collect glossaries. This guy, Frank Dietz, is a German who has a website where he lists a lot of monolingual and bilingual dictionaries. And it's helpful to, when you come across those, to bookmark them so you can go back and look for specific glossaries. Prozee also has some glossaries. That's a site where you might look to see if you can find anything. And then there's all kinds of European online data banks where you can find material. Yep. And that was it.